Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. As always, thank you so much for taking time to be here with me. I hope you're doing awesomely well. I am doing well. Spring is in the air here in Montana, which after a long, dark winter is always welcomed. There are birds chirping and buds blooming on the trees and the flowers, and I love this time of year. It makes my heart really happy. So I don't know where in the world you are listening in from, but I hope your environment is offering you a little hope and happiness as well. So I'm going to dive right into today's topic, which is a topic that I'm really passionate about, so much so that I've created an entire 4-week program around it. It's kind of the foundation of all the work that I teach. And it also happens to be a very unsexy topic when it comes to women's health. What is it? It is the topic of consistency. Now, I'm really passionate about consistency because in my view, it's really the only path for creating sustainable change without sacrificing your mental well-being. And women have a lot of interesting thoughts about consistency, thoughts that actually get in the way of helping them to develop a practice of consistency, because consistency really is a practice. So there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is. And today I want to address some of those misconceptions and share with you some of my own thoughts about what consistency really is, why it's so important, and of course, helping to give you some tools for developing consistency in a more grace-filled way. So the way I'm going to do this is I am going to introduce to you some really common thought errors that I hear from women about consistency. And then I am going to give you some ways of pivoting that line of thinking in case you might be thinking the same things. So, consistency thought error number 1. A lot of women think that consistency means you do things exactly the way you planned to do them all of the time without fail. So you are perfect in your execution. I will tell you here and now, if that were true, this podcast would most definitely not exist. My marriage would have dissolved long ago, and my health would probably be a hot mess. Because in order for me to show up to those things with any degree of consistency, I have to be willing to be sloppy and messy and wildly imperfect. So consistency is really a practice of planning to do better based on the best of what you currently know. And then making some mistakes, being a little sloppy, possibly even failing many, many times, but taking that failure, learning from it, and then standing up a little bit wiser than before. You know, there's that saying, you fall down 9 times, stand up 10. Well, that is the definition of consistency. Consistency is not failing. It is the willingness to consistently get back up after each failure. Many of you know that years ago, I worked with Ido Portal to kind of expand my movement practice. I was fascinated by what he was doing in the movement world. I still very much am. And part of my training with him was learning how to do handstands, freestanding handstands in the center of the room. And when I first was introduced to that practice, I thought, I'm going to get this quick. Like, I've been a mover my whole life. I'm strong. I'm very body aware. These are the thoughts I had. I expected to be able to adopt this practice very quickly. And I will tell you that it took me a year of daily practice, a wildly large number of failures, for me to be able to stand on my hands for 10 seconds in the center of the room. I wish I actually had a way of calculating how many times I actually failed in my pursuit of being able to do handstand work. So at the end of a year, I could only stand on my hands for maybe 10 seconds in the center of the room. And really, at that point, my handstand practice was just beginning. So I had to be willing to embrace failure, to be messy and sloppy and wildly imperfect in my practice, which served me really well. And if this is something that I wish so much I could impart on every single woman as she embarks on a journey to improve her health. If women were more willing to get sloppy and messy and imperfect and commit fiercely to picking themselves up and trying again every time they messed up, if we could build that kind of consistency practice, I have no question in my mind you would create everything you want and more for your health and your life. Consistency thought error number 2. A lot of women are thinking that consistency means their process will be linear. Consistency has nothing to do with linearity. And everything to do, like I said before, with your drive to figure it out no matter where the journey takes you. Because here's what I know for sure. Your journey is going to take you to a lot of unexpected places. And the diet industry wouldn't like you to know this, right? Because they kind of teach you that if you just follow this list of rules and regulations, you will get to where you want to go by this date. It's very linear. But the truth of the matter is, if you want to create meaningful change in your life, you aren't really going to know how you got there until you get there and you're able to look back. And this I know for sure. When you look in that rearview mirror and look at the journey you had to take to get to where you wanted to go, it is going to be so different than what you expected. So I always think of my business. I came into online business 7 years ago, and I had had 2 previous brick and mortar businesses prior to that. And I just thought, I have some experience in building a business, and I'm going to move online, and it's going to be easy. It's just like another brick and mortar business. And I thought if I just followed the rules and the systems and the processes of the people that I was hiring to help me, I would be a raging success within maybe a year, possibly 2. That is not at all how it worked. What I had to learn in order to get to where I am today was so much more than I ever could have expected. And I'm kind of glad I didn't know at the beginning, because I think it would have prevented me from ever getting started. But I am so glad that the journey took me where it did, because even though it took longer, I'm so proud of who I became along the way, what I had to learn, what I had to work through, how I had to manage myself. And although my process was anything but linear, it was a wild, meandering mess. And it still is. But I know where my true north is. And true north is the cause I'm committed to. It's the direction I want to head in my business, in my life. And my work around consistency is not being perfect in my execution or linear in my journey. It is actually in realigning myself every time I get misaligned from that direction, which, let me tell you, happens a lot. Not just to me, but to every human. Life has a way of throwing us off course all the time. So the consistency that I am passionate about helping women to develop is the consistency of realigning yourself every time life throws you a curveball, whether that is self-induced or it's just something that came out of left field you never could have seen coming. That is your work. That is the practice of consistency. And I'll say this here as well, consistency is very personal. And this also is why I think that diets don't really help us to develop consistency over the long run, because we aren't calling the shots. We're not making the decisions based on our values and priorities. The protocols that worked for someone else's life don't necessarily take into consideration the wholeness of my life. And while programs and protocols can be helpful for a while to help you get a little bit of traction, There has to be a point where you take responsibility for driving the car, where you take responsibility for making the decisions for yourself moving forward. You can't follow forever. You can learn and be inspired always, but at some point you have to become the leader of your own life. I have done many, many podcasts on that topic, so I won't go into it too much here. Consistency thought error number 3. I hear a lot of people in a lot of different ways allude to this concept that consistency is rigid, that they have to do certain things a certain way for the rest of their life. Rigidity is the death of consistency. I must eat this particular way all the time. I must move this way all the time. This is a recipe for inconsistency when we have that type of rigidity. Why? Because the nature of life is to change and evolve. Stress loads fluctuate, right? At different ages and stages of life, the level of stress you are carrying at any given amount of time, at any given time, is wildly different. And if you don't learn how to be flexible with some of your behaviors, you will crash and burn. Now, please don't hear me saying you have to completely dismiss certain behaviors. I can be committed to moving my body often and much. I can be committed to being an active woman. That's a direction. But being an active woman is going to look different at different ages and stages of life. If I was training the exact same way I was 10 years ago, I know with certainty that I would not have the level of health I have today. Because given all the responsibilities I have in my life now, training at that level would make my stress load overflow. Not to mention, I'm a very different person 10 years later in my life. My values and priorities have shifted a little bit. So if my biggest value was moving my body, which it isn't, but if it was, like training was the most important thing to me, I could probably train at that same level. But given the other things I have decided to make priorities in my life, it doesn't make sense. And this again goes back to why I think consistency is so personal. What you decide to be consistent about in your life and the way that you go about it is going to be very personal to who you are and the wholeness of your unique life. Here's another way to think about it. If I tried to parent my 11-year-old son the same way I did when he was 3 years old, that would not bode well for either one of us. So I am committed to the direction of being a parent who consistently shows up and meets my child where he's at. But the flexibility within that is acknowledging that that's going to look different. What is required of me as a parent to meet my child where he is at different ages and stages is constantly changing. So consistency requires flexibility, permission to evolve and grow, because life is evolution and growth. So how do we become consistent within that? Will you allow for flexibility within consistency? You know your true north, but what it takes you to keep traveling true north throughout your life is going to look different. Consistency thought error number 4. Consistency means intensity. A lot of women think that consistency is synonymous with intensity, meaning consistency is hard. It's hard work. And I would argue that my professional experience has shown me that the opposite is true. Intensity, or thinking that consistency is hard, is often what extinguishes consistency, especially in the early stages of developing new skills. And again, we see this all the time in the diet industry, right? Overhaul your life over the course of 4 to 6 weeks. And then right around the time the program is starting to end, the novelty is wearing off. So the newness and excitement about doing these new behaviors is starting to fade. That is really where people start to struggle. That is really where people get to start to see the depth of their commitment and how consistent they really are. And a lot of people struggle to be consistent because the measures they took were way too big. And they didn't really learn how to be consistent. They just learned how to follow a list of rules and regulations. So I want you to hear this. Consistency loves simplicity. It loves the path of least resistance. Meaning, the behaviors you are committing to be consistent in, don't focus on all of them at once. Focus on one for a period of time before you move on to the next. What is that period of time? Well, it's personal. For some people, they may only have to focus a week or two on a certain behavior before they feel like it gets easier. For other people, it might be weeks or months. So you staying honest with yourself is a big part of improving your relationship with consistency. But what I mean by the path of least resistance is how can we make it super easy to show up for the one thing you are committed to focusing on? So let's just say that you are committed to moving your body more. How can we create a path of least resistance? Because you're going to want to resist it, right? Your brain doesn't like anything that feels remotely hard. So how can we make it super easy? Well, I could just commit to 20 minutes instead of like an hour, right? So I start with a short period of time. Maybe I invite a friend to go along with me, or I listen to a great podcast while I'm walking, or I listen to some great music. How can you help yourself look forward to that thing? Make it an easy yes in order to show up for it. And as you consistently start showing up for it, you actually can eventually add more in. But what I see so many people is starting with these mammoth expectations and not really ever being able to get traction because they have literally set themselves up for failure because there's so much resistance, because the ask is so ridiculously big. So I want to quantify this for you a little bit. Think about this. If you committed to focusing on one behavior change every 2 weeks for the next year, you would literally have practiced 28 new habits over the course of a year. And let's just say you're someone that takes a little bit longer, right? Like you need to practice certain behaviors a little bit more before they feel easier. So if you committed to focusing on one habit for a month each year, you would have 12 new habits at the end of the year. How could that possibly not improve your health? The compound effect of that is massive. But what a lot of people do is they try to focus on 12 habits in 1 month. They fail miserably, and then they use that as rationalization to not move forward. That is a huge mistake. Please don't do that to yourself. Consistency demands patience. Inside of my membership community, I actually encourage my members to commit to one fierce area of their health each month, and get really specific about what behavior they're committed to following through with in that area. And then we work to hold each other accountable through the month. Consistency demands patience, which means it's not in a hurry. The more of a hurry you are in along your journey, this I know for sure, the less likely you are to develop consistency, which of course is the backbone of sustainability. So in essence, the more of a hurry you're in, the less likely you are to sustain whatever results you achieve. Why are you in such a hurry? I know you're uncomfortable, but the reason you're uncomfortable where you are right now is because you made a series of small decisions over a long period of time that created a certain outcome. And to expect to unravel that outcome in just a few weeks is not going to happen. There's a quote I want to read to you by Jeff Olson from a book that he wrote called The Slight Edge. I have mentioned this book many times. Early on in the podcast, I did an entire episode on it, but it speaks really beautifully to this concept of simplicity and really engaging with simple behaviors over a long period of time. And it says this: the difference between success and failure is not dramatic. In fact, the difference between success and failure is so subtle, so mundane, that most people miss it. They may not realize they have a philosophy, but they do. And it goes like this: what I do right now doesn't really matter. It's not hard to see why people came to this understanding of life. I don't blame them. It's completely understandable. It's just not truth. The truth is, what you do matters. What you do today matters. What you do every day matters. Successful people are those who understand that the little choices they make matter. And because of that, they choose to do things that seem to make no difference at all in the act of doing them. And they do them over and over and over until the compound effect kicks in. Those little things that will make your life successful, that will secure your health, your happiness, your fulfillment, your dreams, are simple, subtle, mundane things that nobody will see, nobody will applaud, nobody will even notice. They are those things that at the time you do them often feel like they make absolutely no difference. Things that are ridiculously easy to do, but just as easy not to do. Things that don't seem to bring you any visible results at first. Things that seem so insignificant they couldn't possibly matter, but they do. Things that when you look at them as singular occurrences, they don't seem like they'd have any impact at all. And yet when compounded over time, they add up to outrageous success. End quote. I love this quote because I see so many women convincing themselves they need complex measures to improve their health. And the truth of it is they don't need complex. It's just that they don't have the patience to do the things that really matter. Drink your water, go to bed at a reasonable time, get enough sleep, manage your mindset, move your body often and much. Eat foods that nourish your body. These are not hard things. These are not complex things. But they take time for that compound effect to kick in. And time is not something I find a lot of people are willing to give themselves. And that's a bummer because it literally is a barrier to consistency. Contrary to what popular culture has conditioned you to believe, your life's work is not to obsessively worry about your weight or how to look when you put on a swimsuit. The real work of your life is to like who you are, what you do, and why you do the things you do. The real work of your life is to become a fully expressed and authentic human, whatever that means for you. And you simply cannot do that work if you're feeling mentally and physically depleted. So I would love to invite you to join Rumble and Rise, which is my private community where I help women step into self-leadership so they can lead themselves into their happiest and healthiest future. If you'd like to join us inside this community, you can read about all the details and all of the goodness that this space provides by heading on over to graceandgrit.com/ready to rumble. Consistency thought error number 5. Consistency is a byproduct of actions. Well, yes, consistency definitely requires that you take action. That is true. But action is driven by thoughts and emotions. So if you don't learn how to manage your brain and you don't learn how to manage your emotional landscape, you will never take consistent action. And this is something that is so near and dear to me, this whole concept, because for many, many years, a lot of you longtime listeners have heard me share this before, but for many years as a health coach, I made the mistake of delivering actions only. I told people exactly what they needed to do to elicit a certain response. The mistake was that I wasn't really armed to help people think differently along their process in terms of really changing the way they think about themselves and their behaviors. I didn't really have the tools to help them manage their own emotional landscape and learn to feel emotions all the way through and not try to manage their emotions by eating and drinking and all the other things available to us that really cost us our health. And so, of course, the byproduct of that was that people got results that they couldn't sustain. Actions are not enough, my friend. And action is so much easier when you address the true driver of it, which is how you think and how you feel. Your thoughts drive your emotions. Your emotions are what cause you to do or not do certain things. And then, of course, your results are a byproduct of your actions that you either do or don't take. So when I say managing your thinking, here are a few things that I mean. What are you making your mistakes mean? Because like I said earlier, mistakes are a baked-in part of consistency. We're meant to make mistakes because it's how we learn and we grow. It's how we stand up stronger. It's how we build resilience. But if you are someone who is making mistakes mean that you're a failure, you're never going to succeed at this, you're always going to have a weight problem, I don't know what this thing is you tell yourself, but there's something. And I want you to ask yourself, is that thing you're telling yourself, is the meaning that you're giving your mistakes actually useful to you? Yesterday, I was recording a class, and a lot of work went into it, and I recorded for 45 minutes. And at the end of the recording, I played it back and there was no sound. Now, did I stop and have a massive pity party for hours? No, I did have a pity party, I will be honest, for about 10 minutes. I was ticked, I was frustrated, I felt all the emotions. But then I literally had to pivot myself and say, okay, Courtney, this blows, but how is it useful for you to keep thinking about it as a major mess up, right? And that you wasted time and that, it's such a bummer that you have to do it again. That is not useful to me. None of that is useful to me. It makes me not want to re-record it. So in that moment, I had to pivot myself into the space of, you know what? Everything happens for a reason. I do believe that, especially with things like this. And I guarantee this next recording is going to be even better. And it was. So what are you making your mistakes mean? What are you telling yourself when obstacles show up? We're heading into the summer months here in North America. And one of the things I see a lot of women rumble with in the summer is they tend to do well during the week when they're at work and kind of in their regular routine. But the weekend shows up and the summer presents us with all this opportunity for barbecues and camping and lake time and travel. And all of that is wonderful. But the thing I hear women tell themselves is, well, I can't possibly eat well on the weekend because I have all these things. Well, when you tell yourself that, of course, you're not going to show up to do the things that would help you to eat well. So how is that useful to you? It's not. What would be useful to you is looking for solutions, getting wildly curious about how you could make this work, being a little bit flexible in your approach, getting out of that all or nothing space. Another thing I like to remind women of is that if you are constantly focused on the outcome you are trying to create, and I specifically talk to those of you who are focused on weight loss, if you are focused on the number, I have 30 pounds to lose, I have 45 pounds to lose, I have 110 pounds to lose, that feels so far away. And it will prevent you from showing up today. So I'm not interested so much in the outcome you are trying to create. I'm more interested in what you're doing today in tribute to that outcome. So what are you doing today that is actually going to help you generate that response down the road? It's a really powerful consideration. Are you more focused on the outcome Or are you more focused on how you need to manage yourself today to eventually reach that outcome? So my point in all of this is your thoughts expand or contract your capacity to be consistent. Because if you think in a way that makes you feel like crap, you are not going to show up for the things that you say are important to you along your health journey. You're going to negotiate your way out of everything. But if you manage yourself to think in a way that keeps you excited and optimistic and focusing on all the ways in which you're winning and what you can learn from your mistakes, I guarantee your capacity for consistency will expand. All right, the final thought error that I want to address here is that consistency means boring. It means boring and predictable, and I have a lack of freedom. I hear this a lot. I've addressed it on previous podcasts. But consistency, you could make it mean that, right? You could make consistency mean I have no freedom. I can't do anything I want. Nobody wants to spend time with me. I'm boring. I'm predictable. But going back to what we just talked about, how is that useful to you? Because you could just as easily argue that being consistent is actually what creates new possibility for your life. And here's the truth. You are being consistent every day. It just happens to be with some behaviors that aren't serving you. So why not pivot your self-development, your sort of self-management in a way that actually helps you to be consistent about things that move your life in the direction you want it to go? Consistency breeds reliability. So think about this. In any relationship in your life, when you consistently show up, especially on the hard days, especially on the days you don't want to, it helps to show that other person that you really care, that you're really committed. It breeds reliability. And the same thing happens with yourself. When you make commitments to yourself that you follow through with on the regular, you start to trust yourself more. And when you trust yourself more, your confidence escalates. And when you have more confidence, you go after the things that are truly on your heart and what you really want for your life. So I would just really challenge you on that thought. If you are someone who thinks that consistency means boring and predictable and that it's robbing you of your freedom, check yourself. And get serious, like really go in and ask, is that useful to me? And if you want to keep that line of thinking, by all means, keep it. But it's not going to help you move forward on your health journey. So I want to give you a couple little side notes here to kind of wrap this up. These are just a few things I wanted to mention on the conversation of consistency. I do think that setting micro goals along your path can be a very powerful way to stay consistent. So even though I really believe and teach that health is a direction that we commit to, and when we get misaligned, we just reroute ourselves to that direction, I do see the goals as kind of mile markers along the way that help you to know you're traveling in the right direction. So let's just say that you're someone who is committed to the direction of being an active and adventurous woman. That's the identity that you are heading towards. That's the identity you want for yourself. Well, one of the goals you might set in tribute to that along your journey is you decide to take some kind of active vacation, right? Maybe you take a bike ride across Europe or something of that nature. So that's a goal that you have to prepare for. And that goal is absolutely in line with the values and priorities that you have for yourself. So when you set goals, make sure that you are putting them through the filter of your values and priorities, of the filter of your true north. Is this in alignment with who you want to be? The other thing I want to say is that consistency needs bumpers. Long ago, I wish I remember where I read this or heard this, but I heard somebody say that consistency is kind of like a bowling alley. It's like the lane of a bowling alley. When you roll the ball and it goes off course, there are bumpers on either side of the lane that pushes the ball into the rut, right? To make sure it stays in your lane and doesn't go into somebody else's. And I love this analogy because a bumper along your road to developing consistent practices is something that reminds you on the regular why you started in the first place, why you committed to this thing. So how are you inspiring yourself? How are you connecting with others who have the same types of passions and pursuits? Are you connecting with others? Do you have people in your life who are supporting you? Those are bumpers, right? They kind of remind us that we're maybe getting a little off track and just gently guiding us back to where we intended to go. And this is it's such a powerful practice to have a daily practice of something that inspires you, motivates you, fires you up, reminds you about why you started to travel this direction in the first place. And then the last note I just want to say about consistency, because obviously we could go on forever here, but rumbling, or as I recently heard it termed, which I loved, thrashing, is a part of the consistency process. You are going to rumble. You are going to have to confront your humanness of imperfection along your journey. And how you confront yourself in those moments is everything in terms of staying consistent. If you're a jerk to yourself, if you don't manage your thoughts and emotions, if you work really hard to convince yourself that this isn't meant for you, that you can't do this, you will prove that to be true. So we have to learn how to rumble well. There will be so much discomfort and so many uncertain moments along the path to change. And how we manage ourselves in those moments are everything. And it is the very reason I started the Rumble and Rise community. Because I always call it's a community of practice. I help women inside this space to get clear on their true north, why they're committed to improving certain areas of their life, specifically health, helping them to be more self-directed and organizing next steps for themselves. And then most importantly, managing themselves in a way that allows them to show up for the work that they have called themselves to do. That's the rumble. And when we're willing to rumble, over time, we actually start to rise. We start to elevate our life and our health and our happiness and all of the things to new levels. So if you are someone who needs help in this department, you really should consider joining us inside this community. And I want to tell you this as well. I mentioned earlier that I have an entire course about consistency. It's called the Consistency Code. And that is actually a bonus. When people join my membership site, which is $59 a month, you can quit at any time. There's no long-term obligation. But when you join in your first month, I gift you the Consistency Code. It's one of your bonuses because it's the highly recommended starting place. I want women to go through that material before they try to tackle anything else. Because I know if they have that foundation, they are going to be able to navigate themselves so much more easily moving forward. So if you need help with consistency, if you want more support in your rumble with your health process, consider joining us. You can check out all the details at graceandgrit.com/ready to rumble. And over the next couple of weeks, I am going to have several current members coming on the show to kind of talk about their experience. So you can hear from their mouth about just what a robust resource of support and inspiration and education this space is. So that's it, my friends. That's all I have for you today. I hope it was helpful. I hope it allows you to pivot your thinking a little bit. And I will look forward to seeing you again very soon. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.